Hello everyone, good evening. It's lovely summer day in Slovenia and it's time for another lovely story. Today I will read Mr Nosey by Roger Hargreaves. This is story with a very strong message, so I really recommend to listen it. I guess it would be great for children and for adults as well sometimes. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Maya. I'm a writer. I love meditation. I love children, and I love fairy tales. And if I put all of these passions together, and I create very special audio meditative fairy tales with FlowerFairy Flora. That's 3F. So these are very special fairy tales because they learn how to meditate. Actually, this is sort of meditation, and they learn how to breathe deeply, how to be connected with your body, how to prepare for your day, that your energy vibration will be higher, and that, with other words, means that your results, I don't know, maybe in the school or somewhere else, will be better. You will be able to meet nicer people, and so on and so on. The children will calm down easier in the evening, and they can release stress which came during the evening. So I really recommend use them together that adults use them together with kids. And there is another right side of everything. If you will listen them together with your kids, that means that you are a great sample for meditations and for techniques like that. And that means that your child will use them automatically through his whole life, and he will be better prepared for his adult period. So this is shortly about me and about my work, and let's start with a story about Mr. Nosey. And prepare your ears and hearts and let's listen. Mr. Nosey liked to know about everything that was going on. He was always poking his nose into other people's business. Mr. Nosey was the sort of a person who, if they come upon a locked door, couldn't resist looking through the keyhole to see why the door had been locked. Mr. Nosey was the sort of a person who, if he found an unopened letter addressed to somebody else, would simply have to open it to find out what was inside. Mr. Nosey was the sort of a person who, if he was sitting reading his paper on a train, would much rather read the paper of the person sitting next to him. Naturally, as you might well imagine, Mr. Nosey was not very popular. People did not like the way in which Mr. Nosey would peek and pry into their affairs. They did not like it all. But did that stop Mr. Nosey picking and praying? It did not. Mr. Nosey lived in a funny, tall, thin house in a place called Tiddletown. The people of Tiddletown decided that Mr. Nosey was becoming much too nosy, and so they held a meeting to discuss what to do about him. "We must find some way of stopping him being so nosy," said old Mr. Chips, the town carpenter. "That's right," said Mrs. Washer, who ran the Tiddleton laundry. "He needs to be taught a lesson." "If only we could think of a way to stop him poking his nose into everything," said Mr. Brush, the painter. And then a small smile spread over his face. "Listen," he said, now grinning. "I have a plan." All his friends gathered round to listen to his plan. The following morning, Mr. Nosey was out walking along Tiddletown High Street when he heard somebody whistling behind one of the closed doors. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and tiptoeing up to the door, he quietly opened it and peeped in. Splash! Went a very wet paintbrush right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose, covering it with bright red paint. "Oh dear, I'm sorry," said Mr. Brush, who was painting the inside of the door. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go straight home and try to remove the red paint, which was very difficult and rather painful. Mr. Brush chuckled to himself. The plan had begun. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking past the laundry when he heard somebody laughing on the other side of the wall. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and standing on tiptoe, he looked over the wall. Snap! Went the cloth peg right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. "Oh dear, I'm sorry," said Mr. Washer, who was hanging up clothes on a washing line on the door on the other side of the wall. Poor Mr. Nosey removed the clothes bag and went off down the street, feeling extremely sorry for himself and for his poor red nose. Mr. Washer chuckled to herself. The plan was working. The next day, Mr. Nosey was going past a fence when he heard hammering. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and, creeping very quietly to the end of the fence, he peeped round. Bang! Went a hammer right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. "Oh dear, I'm sorry," said old Mr. Chips, who was nailing up a loose plank in the fence. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go home immediately and bandage his poor red sore nose. Mr. Chips grinned a broad grin. The plan was working very well indeed. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking in the woods when he heard somebody sawing wood. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and he crept up behind a tree. He was just about to peer out from behind the tree when it suddenly occurred to him that if he did, something very nasty might happen to his nose. And so he went on his way without being nosy. Behind the tree, with a saw raised in his hand, stood Mr. Herd, the farmer. When he saw that Mr. Nosey had gone on his way without being nosy, he laughed and laughed and laughed. The plan had worked. Mr. Herd hurried into Tiddletown to tell everybody. The plan really had worked because after that Mr. Nosey stopped being nosy and soon became very good friends with everybody in Tiddletown. And that is the end of the story, except to say that if you are ever tempted to be a nosy, as Mr. Nosey used to be, you'd rather better expect one thing, a sore nose. And that's the end of the story for today. We've learned that it's not a very good thing to pick your nose into others people's business. So we have to take care of ourselves, and that's it. So I would like to wish you a good night and see you soon. In meantime, you can check FlowerFairy Flora fairy tales, very special audio meditative fairy tales. You can find them on the link below. Sleep well and see you soon. Bye bye. Mwah.